Okay, we're on part two of our big review of the 250 in AP Art History. Um, these lectures are meant to be a review, not as in depth as your notes, probably. So some of you are even more experts at some of these works than I am, which is okay. Actually, that's the way it should be. Um, but let's get going. Okay, I put this together back in 2017. I don't think realizing that Smart History had uh, made some comments about the differences between Byzantine Jesus and Mary and more of the Renaissance Jesus and Mary. But let's look at this. So on the left is the Virgin and Child between Saints Theodore and George, and it's from the 6th or early 7th century. This would be just about 200 years after Constantine, and so now it's the Holy Roman Empire. And the commentators said that they think that Mary is fairly naturalistic on her throne compared to the saints, and I'm okay with that. And one of the other things that they talk about is the fact that this is a heavenly sort of scene, as opposed to Fra Filippo Lippi's wonderful Madonna and Child with two angels, is much more earthbound. You could easily see yourself grabbing, as they talk about, children off the street to pose as the angels. And this is centered in humanism. This is centered in the idea of let's study the earthly realm as opposed to just always thinking about the afterlife. And yeah, it's a beautiful look at the Madonna and Child for sure, and very much in contrast to these different characteristics of Byzantine art. One big one, of course, is the halo. Very, very much seen on the left and barely seen on the right. So we've made a leap, and this leap took, let's see, about 800 years, really. So it makes sense that art would change between that time period. Okay, got some new slides in here of the Great Mosque of Cordoba. It's fascinating. In the middle, originally there was a temple there in the middle. Then a church was made there, and then when the Muslims took over Spain, they then created a mosque around the former temple slash church, and it's one of the things. It's on my bucket list. I'd love to go see it. And let's go inside. So one of the things that the mosque in Cordoba is really known for is the arches with the red sort of decorations, squares or rectangle decoration. Now, one of the things, of course, about the mosque is there's not a hierarchy. There are not pews or benches, and the place at the front is not seen as only the elite should be there. And another thing about a mosque is it's supposed to be big enough to house the whole Muslim community. And so, yeah, you can't go into a mosque when they're in prayer, one of the 5 times of the day. But otherwise, you can go into a mosque any other time that you want, as I found out when I was in Istanbul. Okay, so the Mihrab is this niche that points towards Mecca, and it's a little awkward at Hagia Sophia because it's at an angle because originally it wasn't meant to be a mosque, and that's not true for this one. And it's the most important aspect of the mosque, I would say, because when you kneel and pray towards that Mihrab. And then on the right in Cordoba is the minbar, which is the very famous staircase that you see in every mosque. Okay, from a mosque to a very early church, actually a Romanesque church. So the Romanesque period is the 11th and 12th centuries. Okay, so it goes up to the 1100s or through the 1100s. And this is the Church of St. Voy. And the label Romanesque was supposed to be derogatory because the architecture of Romanesque churches is very heavy and not that light Gothic style. And so let's go to, okay, yeah. So, let's talk about the portals of Romanesque and Gothic churches. So the half circle is what's called a tympanum, and that's where you'll see the majority of the relief sculptures. Up above it is the archivolts, yes, and then there's it's called a lintel is down below usually the tympanum, but we don't have that here. And then what we don't have in this Romanesque portal, and we never see this with the Romanesque style, is the jamb sculptures that are on the door jambs. So if you're traveling in Europe and you come across a church and you're not really sure if it's Gothic or Romanesque, one way to tell is before you go through the doors, there shouldn't be any jamb sculptures with Romanesque churches. And then another aspect, or a couple of aspects of Romanesque churches is a barrel vault. So the Gothic ceilings, of course, are ribbed vaults, which allows for much more height. The pillars, as you can see at St. Voy, are very, again, heavy. And then there's not a second level and a third level. There's only the second level of the clear story, which would have the windows, and that's where the light would come in. So the second level in a Gothic church, which we'll see in a few minutes, is what's called the triforium. So there's the aisle, arches, there's the triforium, and then there's the clear story, which has, in the Gothic churches, of course, these incredibly beautiful stained glass windows, for which the Gothic style is known for. And then we've talked about reliquaries before, but it would be kind of fun to see the actual reliquary. So St. Voy was a church that people did pilgrimages to in the Middle Ages, and a lot of times these reliquaries have bones in them or parchment, and they're usually gold encrusted and really beautiful, at times really, really over the top in their decoration. But anyways, here is the actual St. Voy reliquary. All right, so the Bayeux Tapestry is not actually a tapestry, as we know. It's actually an embroidery. We're not exactly sure who the artisans were, but we probably can guess that it was done in Canterbury. And not all of the panels pertain to William the Conqueror's conquest of England, the Norman conqueror of England, which was in 1066, and England has not been successfully invaded since. So lots of knights, lots of horses. I've never seen it before. I should try and put that on my bucket list as well. Okay, Chartres Cathedral is amazing. It is a great example of the changeover to Gothic art. And on the right side is a older style of Gothic architecture. And it and the middle part there's a great fire, and as a result they rebuilt the church, but by the time they rebuilt the church on the left side, the tower is high Gothic, which best way to sort of describe that would be just a lot more ornamentation. Okay, so let's go to the portal. This is the west main portal that we just saw, the west side. So we got the tympanum, which is your half circle, and then you got your lintel down there with the with I think apostles and kings, and then you got an archivolt level for sure. Now, another thing as far as differences between Romanesque and Gothic is you can start to see that you could get out of the rain. There's more depth to Gothic portals than Romanesque portals. And so if you stood at the doors, you could almost not be rained upon. And then later in Amiens and other, very famous later Gothic churches, you could drive a golf cart up and not get rained on. It's so much more in depth. And then here we have it. We have the jam sculptures, which are very elongated. I love them. I think they're really interesting to look at. Okay, and then it's the last judgment going on in the middle tympanum of the three. All right, we're here. We're at the Gothic cathedral architecture. So here is, right here, I don't know if this pointer is going to show, but here is the triforium. So that's, weirdly enough, the second level, not the third level. And then here you have the clerestory with the huge Gothic cathedral stained glass windows. And I think Chartres is one of the only Gothic cathedrals that still has some of its original, if not all of its original stained glass windows. They did a great job of preserving them. And then up above, you have the ribbed vault ceiling that allows for thinner walls, therefore higher walls, which of course Gothic cathedrals are known for. And then outside, you'd have flying buttresses that would support those thin walls. So flying buttresses, ribbed vaults, triforium second level, jam sculptures in the portal all make this a Gothic cathedral. And you can also see that the columns and piers are thinner than what we saw before. Okay, I think they really updated the material on this work, and it's now I'm really interested in it. Before I was kind of just sort of looked at it and passed on my way. So this is the dedication page with Blanche of Castile on the upper left, and then King Louis IX, who was her son, to the right. And so she was the wife of Louis VIII. They had the child Louis IX, and she was a regent for quite a long time before he was old enough to become king. And she seems to be telling him something with her hand gestures. In the Smart History video, they link that sort of to the Annunciation. I don't really know about that, but it might work. And then down below, you have a scholar telling the artisan what to do as far as making this book that was called, where are we at? What's it called? I have it in my notes. Hold on a second. Oh, yeah, the Moralized Bible, which is basically a graphic novel sort of. First, this is weird. First, they started with the images, and then they wrote the text. So the scholar is directly sort of pointing and telling the artisan, the artist, the scribe, the illuminated manuscript artist, what to put into these. There's usually 4 images, 4 roundels, and then the text with them. Okay, yeah. So this is the end of a book that's primarily in Spain, but this is at the library, Morgan Library and Museum in New York City, and it's basically the last part of the book, and I think this is the last page of that particular Moralized Bible. All right. This is a rather disturbing one. I gotta switch over my notes. Yeah, the Rotgen Pietà. So Pietà is when Mary has Jesus in her arms. Although they say that it's more of a lamentation. He's just been taken down from the cross. It's gruesome, as they say, and I can't agree more. And it really gives you first of all, there's not very many of these wooden sculptures around because they're made of wood, which deteriorates. And also just the overall style of it is in great contrast to the beautiful frescoes and paintings and sculptures we have in the Renaissance of Jesus at his death. So it's quite in contrast to it. So what are we talking about dates? Yeah, 1300 to 1325. So we're in the late Middle Ages, late Gothic period here. Okay, so Proto-Renaissance is something I like to talk about, or the High Gothic period, and that's from 1350 to 1400. And some of the characteristics of the High Gothic is to have a lot of halos. The feet don't touch the ground very well, although we're not seeing that in this Giotto, because Giotto is seen as the bridge figure between the Proto-Renaissance and the early Renaissance. And there's those sort of odd cheese block mountains. We're not seeing gold filament backgrounds, gold leaf backgrounds. So that shows you, again, that Giotto is moving beyond the Proto-Renaissance aesthetic. And I think the biggest thing that you should remember about Giotto is that he differentiates his figures, which you don't see very often in Proto-Renaissance. And he's also showing different emotions of different individuals. And the angels are in torment. It's what you would expect from a scene of a young man having just been killed by the Roman Empire. That stoic Byzantine sort of aesthetic is gone. All right. And then here's the Alhambra. And it's actually 4 palaces created by the last Muslim rulers of Spain. And this is the very famous, from the very famous Palace of the Lions. This is the Court of the Lions. This is definitely on my bucket list. And then there's also the Hall of the Two Sisters, which is part of another palace. And here you can see the incredible decorations. So with Muslim art, there's 3 basic motifs. There's the geometry, which we see here a little bit. vegetation and calligraphy are what you would see in almost every mosque that you would go into, for sure. This is not a mosque, though. These are apartments as part of the Palace of the Two Sisters. Okay, here's Donatello's David. Florence had defeated Milan in a major battle, and as a commemoration of that, somebody in the Medici family commissioned Donatello to make an image of David, who is very much connected to the image of Florence. And there's nothing in the Bible that says that he was nude when he went out to battle with Goliath, and Goliath's head is down there. And now I've found out that I've always thought it just looked like an Easter bonnet that he has on, but there's a wreath sort of decorating the hat, which shows him to be a man of triumph, but of peace, and so on and so forth. So I didn't see this one on our travels. I suspect I could have, but as you know, some museums were closed and some museums were open. Okay, so this is Botticelli's very famous Birth of Venus. It's quite large. It is a quite large painting. The god Zephyr is on the left, sort of blowing wind so she can hit land. One of the aspects that this brings up is that the aspects of the Renaissance is they were still very interested, of course, and the Renaissance is all about relearning of Greek and Roman cultures. So not everything was Christian-based, and there's examples throughout the history of the Italian Renaissance in which you see pagan goddesses and gods in the art. Yeah. Okay. And then this, of course, is one of the most famous, well, all of these are some of the most famous works ever made in the history of art. So this is The Last Supper. And you'll notice that there's no halos, so Da Vinci has done away with those. He is using central point perspective, all lines receding as a distance in parallel fashion. He's just told the apostles that somebody's going to betray him, and they're all reacting to that news. And there is 4 groupings of 3 of the apostles together. And the most famous, of course, would be directly to the right of Jesus, where you see St. John the Evangelist, and then you also see, who else is in there? Oh, Peter, who's going to threatens to do something with whoever is said to be the betrayer of Christ, and then you have Judas, who's right there. So it's sort of Peter is literally breathing down his neck in this particular scene, and they talk about, and it's always mentioned that Leonardo was very experimental always, and he was experimenting with egg-based paint and oil paint, and he painted onto dried plaster. And that wasn't great for the painting. It started to deteriorate basically as soon as he was done with it. So I think I mentioned that before in some of these recordings, but it was good to hear that again, so I wasn't thinking. And a lot of this stuff is like, well, yeah, that's right. I knew that. Some of it is new, though. Okay, Michelangelo's The Sistine Chapel ceiling, and feel incredibly lucky to have seen it in person in December of 24. It was Christmas Eve, actually. It was Christmas. It was closed. It's a beautiful chapel. It has more than just Michelangelo's works. There's also on the side panels various different artists who had worked in the Sistine Chapel. Famously, as they talk about in the Smart Art History video, it's where the cardinals elect the next pope. And it also talks about how there's 9 panels in the middle that are truly the most important panels of the entire ceiling. Julian II commissioned Michelangelo to do this ceiling fresco series. We don't know who actually came up with the content. We don't know if it was Michelangelo or the Pope or somebody else. Let's see, what else do we got in here? Yeah, this is which one? I have it here. Hold on a second. Okay, yeah, so this is the Delphic Sibyl. And maybe I knew this before, but I don't think I did, that he used actually a male model. You can see that her shoulders are quite broad and muscular. And yes, one of my former students a long time ago, she let me have her study of the study on the left, and I still have it in my classroom somewhere, I think. I hope I do. But this figure would not be in one of the main 9 panels. It would be on the side. And then I think you guys have heard me talk about this before, that originally Michelangelo did a series of 3 panels about Noah. And he did this one. He came off the scaffolding and he realized that if he kept going like this, the figures would just be too small and indiscernible, or at least close to being indiscernible. So he started to make things much larger after this panel, which this is what I learned from our tour guide in the Vatican. And then 10 years later, Michelangelo comes back and puts in Jesus, because the other panels are only Old Testament. And down here, you can kind of see it. This is St. Bartholomew, who famously was skinned alive. So he has sort of his outer skin here, which is interesting. And this is at the back of the Sistine Chapel, behind the altarpiece. Okay, we're doing pretty well. All right, so at the same time that Michelangelo is doing the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Raphael was commissioned by the Pope to paint murals, to paint frescoes for the papal apartments. And where are we at here? I gotta find. Yeah, so on the upper stairs to the left is Plato, who is more theoretical. That's why he's pointing up to the sky. And it's also modeled after Leonardo da Vinci. The face is modeled on Leonardo da Vinci. And then his pupil, who was Aristotle, is more interested in the observable world. So that's why he has his hand pointing to the land. Yeah. And so I actually did my first paper in college, my first art history in college, paper in college about this painting. Each one of these individuals represents a field of study. And to the left at the bottom is poetry. It's this woman in a white gown. And then there's some geometry and astronomy going on also in the foreground. And then sort of just left of center is a brooding artist, and it's actually Michelangelo, who we know didn't appreciate the fact that Raphael put him in the painting. All right. Okay, so now I'm not supposed to call it the Merode altarpiece. I'm supposed to call it, which is what I was told to call it in college. It's just the Annunciation triptych, and it's not they think it's not totally by the hand of Robert Campin. They believe it's also done by people in his workshop. Okay, here are some of the characteristics of the Northern Renaissance. Incredible detail, and that's something that they talk about extensively in the Smart History video. The drapery is not realistic, but exquisite and beautiful, for sure, as you can see in the middle panel with Gabriel and Mary. What else? Let's see. The women have crimped hair, not the most intellectually exciting sort of characteristics, but it's true. If you see hair that's crimped, it's probably going to be Northern Renaissance. Urban backdrops, in particular, on the left panel and the right panel, you can see the cities in the background, or the city. What else? And it's also psychologically intimate. There's a closeness between Gabriel and Mary. There's a psychological sort of intimacy between the patron on the left, who's at the door with his wife. Yeah. And then on the right-hand side is Joseph, old man Joseph, in his carpenter shop making mouse traps. I've heard he's making traps for the devil, but they talk a lot about in the Smart Art History video that it's probably just mouse traps. And there's just all kinds of just fascinating things about this. I've seen this piece before out at the Cloisters, which is on the southern end of Manhattan, former monastery. And it's smaller than other triptychs because it was meant for worship inside the patron's household. Okay, I agree with the commentators. This is one of the most interesting and just jaw-dropping works of art ever made. I love this particular painting. I've studied it pretty intensely throughout my career as an art history teacher. So this is Arnolfini on the left. On the right is his wife. We used to call it the Arnolfini wedding portrait. There's some discussion between scholars these days about that. Their religiosity is very much emphasized with both of their shoes are off. They have one candle lit in the candelabra. The mirror is surrounded by the Stations of the Cross. St. Margaret is decorating one of the parts of the bed. There's amber prayer beads alongside the mirror. Okay, so how do we know that they're rich? We know that because of the incredible ermine and other fur trim in their clothing. Also, they have oranges, which was they were very expensive at that time. A mirror would have been expensive as well. The red and green dye colors for the bed and for her dress would have been very, very expensive. And what's the dog doing there? He represents fidelity between the couple. And then another big famous part of this, of course, is that there's two men coming through the door, and Jan van Eyck just doesn't put his signature. He says Jan van Eyck was here, and that's why past scholars have believed that this is kind of like the signing of a marriage document. But again, that's up for more debate these days. Okay, here's Adam and Eve by Albrecht Dürer. I would say, well, as far as who's famous, probably Jan van Eyck and then Albrecht Dürer. You could probably switch those two. But so it's Adam and Eve in the forest. And there's symbolism with the 6 different animals. I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. So it represents the body humors. 4 of them do. And so the elk represents melancholy, and the rabbit a more relaxed sort of at ease and peaceful sort of existence. So that's the rabbit. The elk is melancholy. And then the other animals are the ox, cat, mouse, and goat, who's, you can't see it very well. I don't even know if I've ever seen it before. In the upper right-hand corner is the goat on top of the mountain there. Albrecht Dürer, known for his prints, for sure, his etchings more than anything else probably. I mean, he's got some decent paintings, but we think of him as a master of printmaking. And I think that's one of the reasons why they put this one in here as opposed to one of his paintings, because they're trying to give you a variety in the 250 of different mediums. Okay, I think this is our last one, and then we'll finish this lecture in a few minutes from your time. So this is Bruegel, Peter Bruegel's Hunters in the Snow. I have an extra for you if you want it. It's Great Art Explained. I think it's a pretty decent video cast by this guy. He's done a lot of these. And I found one on the Hunters in the Snow. I've just so you're aware, it's one you could use. So Bruegel oftentimes has a diagonal composition, which you can strongly see with this one. And there's little sort of dramas going on in certain parts of the background. And we definitely see that one with the Haymakers that's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so there was a patron who commissioned Bruegel to do 6 different paintings of 6 different times in the seasons in the year. One of them is maple syrup harvesting during a very dark, cloudy April storm, which we've been used to lately. And they also talk about the meager hunt. There's only one rabbit that is stowed away on the back of the furthest hunter. And so the dogs and the hunters were not very successful, which some of you would probably think was good, which was fine. What else? Yeah, it's the most... Okay, so I know it's super popular. I've seen it in people's homes, but the smart history people say that it's the most No. It's actually Great Art Explained. The guy says that it's the most popular ever Christmas card image, which I totally believe is true, especially in Minnesota. Okay, we will be coming back and talking about mannerism through realism is next. Okay, excuse me. We are back. So let's get to it. So mannerism comes after the High Renaissance. The High Renaissance would be 1490 to 525, 523. And then a lot of people ask, what's in between the High Renaissance with Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci, and the beginning of the Baroque period, which is the 1600s. So the answer is mannerism, and we have before us not the we're a little bit on the second page, last one on the second page. It's not the entombment of Christ. I think it's the deposition. Anyways, so what are the mannerist characteristics? Elongation of the figure and an unusual color palette. And Pontormo is one of the best examples of that. Just trust me, you don't see these sort of blue pink colors very much in Italian art. Not the way the cool colors are done here, at least. So that's mannerism, and that's what I need to say about that. Okay. Now we're looking at a Baroque church, which I saw so many examples of in Rome. And it brought up this question for me. So was it because they really felt the competition from the Protestants starting in 1517? And then the Counter-Reformation begins. I don't know if I ever have had a date for the Counter-Reformation. I think it's 1545 is when it starts. Yeah, 1545. So, and you go into these churches, and it's always Baroque paintings, which we'll talk about in a couple of seconds. And also so the way that you can tell that this is a Baroque church is that there are these pilasters, these fake columns. That's a big part of it. And also that scroll up above is another big characteristic before you even go into the church. And then when you go into the church, one of the things that the Baroque period is known for are these incredible illusionistic ceilings that include paintings that are basically displayed in front of the architecture to make it look even more illusionistic. And I've always said, I think, one of the reasons they're doing this is that you certainly might be thinking about becoming a Protestant, but you go to a Catholic mass inside a building like this, and you look up, and it's just eye candy. It's beautiful illusionism. It's just one of my theories. I will at some point get to the bottom of why there are so many Baroque churches. Were their coffers increased through certain things happening with world trade? I don't know. I just remember saying to myself, I've got to understand why there's so many Baroque churches. Okay, I think the easy answer would be that they finally had competition, right? And they wanted to keep people in the church or bring them back to the church. Aha, Baroque paintings. So this is a work by Caravaggio, the most written about artist of all time. And let's go through some characteristics of Baroque paintings. So the first thing that probably really comes through for you and for me would be that strong contrast between dark and light. There's also a split second in time that's shown. There's no really question as to what is exactly happening, or in this case, Jesus calling St. Matthew to be one of his disciples. You also have, although I don't think you have that here necessarily, but there's always sort of a mixed composition. Although you have a little bit of dead space in between those two guys in the foreground. What else? They're very melodramatic. And that's true for this one as well. You will come with me and be one of my disciples is kind of how that's going on. What else? Well, for Caravaggio, he uses everyday people off the street as his models. So I think those all come out in this particular painting, which I was so close to seeing in Rome, but we were there partly through Christmas, and at Christmas the churches were closed after the morning. It's a long story. Let's not get into it. Okay, and then the most famous Baroque sculpture by far is Bernini's The Ecstasy of St. Teresa, who had just recently been designated as a saint. And it's a religious ecstasy. The angel is piercing her heart with, love of God, I guess, or God's love for her. And you can see that it's very melodramatic. It's a split second in time. And this is all a part of a really sort of an art installation. It's more than just the sculpture. There's a lot of stuff going on there that are emphasizing Baroque characteristics. Okay, I used to think there was like maybe 8 to 10 of these paintings done by Peter Paul Rubens of St. Catherine's life. St. Catherine, what am I saying? Catherine de Medici's life. And I guess I've just realized now by watching the Smart Art History video, actually there's 24, which is... One of the commentators says, like, she didn't have that interesting of a life. And anyway, so this is apparently King Henry of France seeing for the first time an image of who will soon be his wife, St. Catherine. Why do I keep saying St. Catherine? Catherine de Medici. Up above, it would be Zeus and Hera. And yeah, so Peter Paul Rubens was known really as this sort of courtly artist. He went to all the major European aristocratic courts and was sort of a painter for hire, so to speak. And apparently he did all of these paintings for Catherine de Medici. Okay, the Queen of France. All right. Okay, this is Rembrandt, a self-portrait. We believe that he did 75 self-portraits, so he made more self-portraits than anybody else before him. It's Saskia, his first wife, in the background, and they're wearing apparently historical clothing. It wouldn't be clothing of their time. And this is an etching. You start off with a wax sort of layer over your plate, and then you use a etching needle and then make the lines, and then you use acid to burn it as part of the whole process with usually a copper plate. I don't know if you can use other plates. I'll have to ask Jeremy. Yeah. Now, I've always wondered why this self-portrait. I think it's because they wanted to put it in another print. They're always trying to make a diverse medium sort of 250. Okay, Mr. Vermeer. Johannes Vermeer. So this is in the Netherlands, and so we call it the Dutch 17th century, even though it's really Dutch Baroque, but nobody ever says that. Everybody says Dutch 17th century. And the most talked about painter in the last 20 years? Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, well, Caravaggio's up there too. Written about, I don't know, there's a brand new book out on Vermeer recently. Okay, so you have a pregnant woman who is weighing objects, weighing gold, and the commentators on Smart History talk about some theories. I'm gonna stay with Last Judgment, because in the background, when it was cleaned, it was discovered that there was Jesus doing a last judgment of everybody in the world. And so I agree with scholars who think it's about her weighing her soul before she gives birth. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I support it. Okay, we can argue about it later. All right, so that's Vermeer's. What's the title? Where are we at? Oh, yes, okay. So, yeah, Woman Holding a Balance. Rachel Roche is the painter of this fine still life, and she's fascinating. There's been a couple of shows. I actually have the new catalog. She's known for her paintings, particularly of flowers, but we have something different here. And I learned a little bit more from the Smart History people that it's likely that she sketched certain areas. Like maybe she did the grates first, then she did the nest, and then brought them all together in her painting. And that brings up verisimilitude, which is a hyper surrealism that really the Dutch 17th century artists were the champions of. I mean, they were amazing. And I'm just going to talk about 2 or 3 of the ways in which they were able to achieve verisimilitude. And one of them would be the objects were in front of them. Now, I mentioned that one first because we know from the smart history people that, again, she didn't have everything in front of her and then just paint it. She was putting together sort of a collage of her studies of various different fruits and butterflies and lizards and such. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, they trained for a long time, and actually Roche actually lived a long time and created art for a long time, even into her 80s, which is really awesome. Let's do another verisimilitude characteristic: indiscernible brushstrokes. Yes, amazing. That you can't see the brushstrokes. This is way before Impressionism, obviously, in which they were trying to have you see these brushstrokes. What else? Oh, I like this whole idea of being kind of inside the three-dimensional space, although I don't think this is the greatest example, but you're inside looking at this. This also brings about a hyper illusionism. Okay, now we're going to go to Velasquez. Nope. Oh, it's because I didn't put it in there, Las Meninas. I forgot to put it in there. Okay, so before we talk about Versailles, let's talk about Las Meninas, the very, very famous painting of Velasquez. Within the painting that he's painting of the princess and her court, there's a dog in there, and I didn't realize they're able to identify basically everybody in the painting, including, of course, the parents that are there's a mirror image of them in the background. It'd be really interesting to compare that to the Arnolfini portrait with the mirror, and what sort of function does mirrors have in those two paintings. That'd be kind of fun. Okay, we're going to take a break for a second. I'll be back. Okay, as oftentimes happens in these recorded lectures, we went past the image of Versailles. I think maybe you saw it. Anyways, here's some stats. So, everybody always talks about how Versailles was, the original spot was just a humble sort of hunting lodge. And of course, Louis XVI would have none of that. So he, over 21 years, they created a palace with 700 rooms, and 20,000 people stayed there. And it was really, truly a means by which to control the aristocracy, to have them around. And of course, there was all these just different rules that were sort of, interesting, we'll say. You had to dance at the level of professional dancers. You had to always be in the best fashion. And that's when seasonal fashion change was created during the Rococo period. You had to be witty at court. You had to be able to write as well, at a level, I don't know, that we would expect from maybe professors. I don't know. Anyways, lots and lots of rules around Versailles. It's on my bucket list. I don't know if I'll ever get that. I don't know if I'll ever go back to France, but we'll see. Okay, so this is The Swing by Fragonard. It is seen as the most important Rococo painting of its time. So let's talk about some of the characteristics. It's vacuous. There's no politics.
in Rococo paintings, and that's the way Louis the 14th wanted it. He didn't want everybody to think about the politics of the day. A lot of pastel colors, and usually aristocrats out in gardens playing children's games, which this one checks all the boxes. Okay, next. One of my favorite artists of all time. I'd put her in my top 5 with Ammonia Lewis as my first. So this is Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun, who was the main court painter of Marie Antoinette. And of course, when the revolution started in 1789, she had to get out of France. And one of the first places she went to was Rome. And that's where she did this self-portrait. And remember that back in that time period and before that time period, women artists were rare for various different reasons that we've talked about before. And so to have a self-portrait of an artist who's a woman in your home would have been a big deal. And this is at the Uffizi Museum in Florence, and I've seen it. It kind of surprised me. I guess I didn't remember that it was there. It was sort of a little bit of a sort of what? And then I thought, oh yeah, right. Vigée Lebrun was in Europe, all over Europe after the French Revolution. She actually went back, which I didn't know about until a couple months ago, to France, when sort of the coast had cleared, I guess you could say. Okay, now we're going to move to William Hogarth, who is the most satirical painter of all time. And this is from a series of 6 paintings. This is the second one, Tête-à-Tête. And the man has been out drinking and carousing. And I learned from the smart art history people that he has a hat in his pocket. That was probably the woman who he was with that night. And his wife has also been having quite a time herself. There's all kinds of symbolism or parts to this painting in which you would think that she herself had just recently been with somebody. And then the accountant is furious. He's tired of this couple who, A, hate each other, and B, are just spending money like crazy, and that are immoral. And so this was made into a print series at this time with Hogarth. The painting and the print series would have been 1743, so there was an arising sort of middle class that was interested in art and having art in their homes, but couldn't afford a major painting like this. And so Hogarth was really an innovator with regards to marketing his prints to that group. Okay, so the group is called a Marriage a la Mode, or Modern Marriage. Okay, so this is Joseph Wright of Derby, and recently on an EMAC I had him on there. So he is very influenced by the Baroque time period. He even goes a little bit further than chiaroscuro, that strong contrast between dark and light. It's called tenebrism, so it's a little bit notched up. And here we're seeing an example of what we would call the scientific revolution, which was, of course, all about in the Enlightenment. That so basically, kind of the way my stock sort of way of talking about the Enlightenment is that when the volcano goes off somewhere in Europe. Before the Enlightenment, they would have said it was the punishment of God. But during the Enlightenment and after the Enlightenment, people would have said, well, no, there's There's laws of nature, and we can start to understand the laws of nature, and it happened not because of God, but because of those laws of nature. Another way to kind of describe it would be in the political realm. Voltaire wrote this book called Candide, and he said, don't get all sort of interested in what God's doing. Just till your own garden. You have the ability to understand the laws of nature and start to control nature and to make a better life for yourself. And then, of course, there's also the idea of the social contract from Rousseau, who says, you know what? Divine right, which is the belief that God put Louis XIV in his mother's womb, and therefore was destined to be the king of France. Actually, if he's not ruling in our best interests, there's a social contract that we can vote him out or by other means. And that's exactly what happens, of course, in 1789 with Louis XVI. So when I think about the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, I always think about this painting. All right, this is the Oath of the Horatii, and it is an example of neoclassicism. And now we're going into a stretch in which each movement will be the sort of counter movement to what came before it. So where Rococo was vacuous, this is full of political ideas. And this is an example of neoclassicism, which we've gone over in class. Strong horizontal composition, focus on male anatomy, particularly here with the legs, no depth in the background, and a Greek and Roman story. So these three men are giving an oath to protect their city-state against another three men who are from Alba. Instead of having a large war, it's 3-on-3. And the women are upset either because they're married to or are going to marry one of the quote-unquote enemy or come from families of the enemy. Excuse me. And yeah, so this is an early example of neoclassicism with Jacques-Louis David. Excuse me. All right, Monticello. I've been one time. I think you only need one time at Monticello. It is based off of a Italian Renaissance architect's plans. And the guy's name was Palladio. And it has a central dome structure. And you go in, and it's very, very much built and organized along principles of architecture that had come before Jefferson had this built. What's the date on this with Monticello? Yeah, 1768, 1809. He was always adding to it. One thing that I always talk about, which has probably been recorded before, is when you go in and you turn around, there's a mechanical sort of functioning calendar, and it tells you what day of the week it is. They screwed up, and Sunday's down in the wine cellar. So I guess if the bauble or the mechanical thing that tells you the day of the week by going by the day of the written out, I think if you see it down below in the wine cellar, then you know it's Sunday, basically. But yeah, so, and then did you know that Thomas Jefferson's library was the seed of what we now call the Library of Congress, that he gave his books after his death, I would imagine, or maybe a little bit before, to Congress, and that started the library, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we are in the 250th year celebration of our country, and there's going to be a lot of images of George Washington. There's an article in the New York Times a couple days ago of this guy during the bicentennial who collected like George Washington toilet paper and all kinds of stuff. I might put it on an emac for sure. But one of the things that they talk about in the Smart Art History video is that, there's arguments about whether or not Charles Willson Peale or Gilbert Stuart were the best portrait painters of George Washington. But really, the best is Houdon's, probably because he had a mask made of George Washington at Mount Vernon, which I think is really interesting. There's fasci on the side, those rods that were used in the Roman Empire to show power. And then there's a sword and a military coat that he's putting over the fasci. And then he is showing himself to become, again, a gentleman farmer, which, of course, is a very, very significant and historical point in politics in the world. Okay, I'm sad that there's not more American art in the 250, but I totally understand it. I understand that we have to have a little bit more diversity than a landscape from the Hudson River Valley School, but that's just me. So this is Thomas Cole. You can somewhat see him in the middle here with his top hat on, and that's the first sort of example of what we call Romanticism, because humans are in this case, human, is very small in comparison to what else is in this painting, which is nature. And so Romanticism, of course, is man, woman versus nature. Nature wins. You got the windswept trees on the left. You've got the cloud bank coming in. You've got the religious quoting of the Bible on that hillside, which I always imagine was done by it wouldn't be a chainsaw, but a Christian lumberjack. And this is the Hudson River. Of course, Thomas Cole is the founder, so to speak, of the Hudson River Valley School. It was never a real school, but a group of artists who went out and painted nature in this romantic way. Okay, liberty leading the people. So I knew that this wasn't the Revolution of 1789. It's actually the Revolution of 1830, in which they got rid of Charles X, who apparently was not a good leader. And so this is kind of getting into the whole idea of the Enlightenment. And then they put in Louis Philippe as the leader. And there's two social classes happening to the left, somebody from the lower classes and then somebody from the middle class with the top hat on, showing that it was a revolution created by everybody. And then there's soldiers on the right who are being defeated. And then apparently they took up the cobblestones of the street and then made these sort of walls for protection, and that's what they're leaping over. Liberty is leading the people. Okay. And then this is The Slave Ship by J.M.W. Turner. There's been a lot of interest in Turner as of late. He is the most beloved artist of England, without a doubt. Don't make fun of him in an English pub. And this is the slave ship, and what's happening is that they have, in the midst of a storm, they have thrown into the sea the slaves because they want to get insurance money for the deaths of these people. It's just incredibly, just a horrific scene. And also one of the things that you see in here aesthetically is he's starting to loosen up his brushstroke and his use of color, which some might say maybe influenced the Impressionists. I'm just going to say maybe. Okay, so they talk a lot about with the Smart History video that Aang, what was he doing? This is not an accurate depiction of a harem. They were talking about her odd body and I never noticed this. The left leg really cannot connect to her body in the right way. And then also they always talk about the extra vertebrae, and this is painted in, because he was a student of Jacques Louis David. This is painted in a somewhat sort of not neoclassical style, but you can't see the brush strokes. It's very pristine, so on and so forth. So this is the Odalisque. How are we doing? Okay, so Los Capricios is, it was 80 prints made over 2 years by Goya in the latter half. Yeah, so 1797 and 1798, latter half of the 19th century, and a lot of them were critical of the Spanish aristocracy, which is fascinating because early on he was a Spanish Rococo painter. Check it out, it's true. But the last part of the Los Capricios etching series is about how France had taken over Spain during the Enlightenment era, and yes, the Enlightenment was this incredible change that brought about the world we live in today. But for the Spanish, it wasn't that great because they were being killed and tortured by the French Enlightenment soldiers. And then last but not least, this is our last one for number 2 lecture. We'll do number 3 lecture soon. That's going to be the 5th sheet, and that's going to be, we'll have some fun with that. This is a very well-known example of realism, even though it doesn't exist anymore. It was destroyed during World War II. But this is the Stonebreakers. You have a son who has a torn shirt and a dad out breaking stones for a roadway. And French realism is something in the early to sort of mid 1800s, and it's a focus on the poor, the peasantry, and there's a theory out there I've talked about before in recordings that with the doing away of the aristocracy with the French Revolution, it would make sense that there would be a movement after that would concentrate on the people. And so that's what's happening here with Courbet's The Stonebreakers. All right, we're done. We're going to come back for number 3 soon. That's it. We're done.